Some goodbyes do not end careers. They reveal what a heart has been carrying all along. The words no one expected to hear echoed through the grand auditorium before anyone even realized the meeting had begun. More than 600 executives, investors, attorneys, journalists, and employees filled the elegant hall inside Carter Global Holdings, one of the most respected corporations in America. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while sunlight poured through towering glass walls overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Every seat was occupied. Every camera was focused on the stage. Every person believed they were about to witness another historic announcement about expansion, innovation, or record-breaking profits. Instead, Nathan Carter quietly adjusted the microphone, looked across the familiar faces that had walked beside him for more than 2 decades, and offered a calm smile that somehow carried both gratitude and farewell. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, yet there was nothing proud or distant about him. His shoulders were relaxed. His eyes were gentle. There was no trace of fear, only the quiet peace of a man who had already made the hardest decision of his life long before stepping onto the stage. A member of the board leaned toward another executive and whispered that Nathan looked different today. Another guessed he had finally decided to announce the company's largest international acquisition. Financial reporters prepared headlines before hearing a single word. Investors exchanged confident smiles. The entire room expected success. No one expected sacrifice. Nathan slowly removed the identification badge from his jacket and placed it beside a glass of untouched water. The soft click against the wooden podium somehow sounded louder than applause. He looked toward the back of the auditorium for only a brief moment. Sitting quietly beside his longtime executive assistant was an 8-year-old girl wearing a pale blue dress and white sneakers. Emily Carter held a small wooden box carefully across her lap, her fingers resting gently on its smooth surface as though protecting something precious hidden inside. She smiled when her father found her eyes, and he answered with the same warm expression he gave her every morning before school. It was the smile that always promised everything would be all right. Only Emily noticed that it did not quite reach his eyes today. The chairman proudly introduced Nathan as the visionary who had transformed a struggling regional company into a global leader admired for both innovation and integrity. The audience rose together in a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Nathan thanked them with a humble nod before raising one hand for silence. The applause slowly disappeared until only the quiet hum of the ventilation system remained. He unfolded a single sheet of paper. His voice remained steady. Today is not a celebration of another achievement, he began softly. Today is a day of honesty. Curious expressions spread throughout the room. Pens stopped moving. Cameras zoomed closer. Nathan drew one slow breath before continuing. After many months of reflection, I have decided that today will be my final day serving as Chief Executive Officer of Carter Global Holdings. The silence that followed felt almost impossible. Several reporters looked at one another in disbelief, wondering whether they had heard correctly. One investor quietly shook his head. A director instinctively reached for the edge of the conference table as though searching for balance. Nathan remained completely composed. Every company eventually learns how to continue without its founder, he said gently. The greater question is whether a father knows when it is time to stop missing moments that can never be lived twice. Before anyone could ask another question, before the chairman could step toward the microphone, a small chair quietly scraped across the floor near the back of the auditorium. Emily stood up, holding the little wooden box tightly against her heart. Hundreds of faces turned toward the child as she took one careful step into the aisle, lifted her eyes toward her father, and spoke with a voice so innocent that it instantly silenced every whisper in the room. "Daddy," she called softly, "please do not leave until they know the truth." 6 months earlier, long before the stunned silence inside the auditorium, Nathan Carter lived a life divided between two worlds that almost never touched each other. Before sunrise each morning, the spacious kitchen of his quiet Connecticut home filled with the warm scent of fresh coffee, toasted bread, and blueberry pancakes shaped like little stars because Emily insisted ordinary circles tasted boring. Nathan stood at the stove wearing a simple gray sweater instead of an expensive suit, carefully turning each pancake while humming the same old melody his late wife used to sing on peaceful mornings. Outside, soft golden light spread across the backyard where maple trees gently swayed in the cool breeze. Inside, family photographs covered the walls instead of priceless artwork. Framed memories of birthdays, camping trips, school plays, and ordinary afternoons reminded him every day that the greatest treasures in his life had never carried a price tag. Emily hurried downstairs carrying her favorite storybook beneath one arm, her blonde hair still slightly messy from sleep. She smiled the moment she saw breakfast waiting on the table. "You made the star pancakes again," she whispered happily. Nathan laughed as he placed another pancake on her plate. "A promise is a promise." Emily climbed onto her chair and reached for the handwritten note resting beside her glass of orange juice. Every morning Nathan left a different message. Sometimes it was a joke. Sometimes it was a Bible verse Grace had loved. Sometimes it was simply a reminder that she was brave, kind, and deeply loved. Emily carefully folded each note and kept them inside a small memory box in her bedroom because she believed words filled with love should never be thrown away. After breakfast Nathan drove her to Maple Grove Elementary School in a dark blue family sport utility vehicle that looked surprisingly ordinary for a billionaire. As children hurried across the crosswalk laughing with friends, Emily leaned over and hugged him before opening the door. "Will you pick me up today?" she asked. Nathan smiled without hesitation. "I will be here before the last bell rings." She nodded with complete confidence because her father had never broken that promise. Only after watching her disappear inside the school did Nathan drive toward the gleaming headquarters of Carter Global Holdings in downtown Manhattan. Within minutes, the peaceful father became the respected leader admired across the business world. The lobby buzzed with quiet professionalism as employees greeted him by name. Nathan smiled at the security officers, thanked the custodians polishing the marble floors, asked a receptionist about her son's baseball game, and congratulated a young analyst on completing graduate school. People respected him not because he was wealthy, but because he never allowed success to make him forget kindness. Throughout the morning meeting, giant digital screens displayed soaring profits, expanding markets, and ambitious plans stretching across Europe and Asia. Executives applauded every new milestone. Investors praised another record quarter. Yet while everyone else studied charts filled with impressive numbers, Nathan found his attention drifting toward the family photograph resting inside a simple silver frame on his desk. It showed Grace sitting beneath a maple tree with 3-year-old Emily asleep against her shoulder. Nathan gently touched the corner of the frame before looking back toward the meeting. His assistant quietly reminded him that another overseas trip would require almost 3 weeks away from home. Nathan thanked her with a polite smile but said nothing. That evening, after finishing another full day of negotiations, he arrived exactly 5 minutes before the final school bell. Emily ran toward him with bright excitement and proudly held up a colorful drawing she had made in class. It showed a little girl holding her father's hand beneath a bright yellow sun. Above them she had written in careful letters, "My daddy always comes home." Nathan looked at the drawing much longer than anyone would have expected. The paper was simple. The crayons were uneven. Yet in that quiet moment he realized no award hanging inside his office had ever meant half as much as the innocent picture resting gently in his hands. The little drawing Emily had proudly handed to Nathan stayed on his desk long after every business report had been filed away. While colorful graphs projected future growth across conference room walls, the crayon picture rested quietly beside his laptop, reminding him that somewhere beyond the glass towers of Manhattan, an 8-year-old girl believed with complete confidence that her father would always come home. Every time Nathan looked at those uneven letters, he smiled without realizing it. A week later, the board of directors gathered inside the executive conference room overlooking the Hudson River. Morning sunlight reflected across the polished walnut table while steaming cups of coffee filled the room with a rich aroma. Digital screens displayed a bold headline. Global Expansion Initiative. The chairman stood confidently before the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, this is the opportunity we have prepared for during the last 5 years. Charts appeared showing new headquarters across Europe, Asia, and South America. Another executive proudly explained that Nathan would personally oversee the international rollout. The proposed schedule required nearly 200 travel days every year. Another director smiled. Your leadership is the reason investors trust us. We need you in every major market. Several people nodded enthusiastically. Nathan remained silent, carefully reading the itinerary instead of the financial projections. London, Tokyo, Singapore, Berlin, Sydney. Each destination represented another week away from home. Another birthday. Another school performance. Another bedtime story that would never be told. Finally, the chairman looked directly at him. Nathan, this expansion will define your legacy. Nathan slowly folded the schedule and placed it neatly on the table. May I ask a question? He said calmly. Of course. How many evenings would I be home if I accepted this plan? The room became unexpectedly quiet. One executive gave a reassuring smile. Technology makes distance much easier these days. Video calls solve most family concerns. Another added, children adapt quickly. She will understand that her father is building something extraordinary. Nathan looked toward the city. Skyline outside the windows before answering in the same steady voice that had earned respect for years. Children do not measure love by video calls. They measure it by empty chairs at dinner and the sound of a key turning in the front door. Nobody interrupted him. When my daughter asks whether I will be home before bedtime, she is not asking about my schedule. She is asking whether she still matters more than my work. Several directors lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The chairman cleared his throat. Every great leader sacrifices something. Nathan nodded slowly. That is true. But I no longer believe children should be the ones paying the bill. The meeting continued, yet the excitement that had filled the room only minutes earlier quietly faded. Late that afternoon, Nathan returned to his office where his longtime assistant, Rebecca Collins, waited beside his desk with another folder of travel documents. She noticed the thoughtful expression on his face before speaking. You have not approved the flights, she said gently. Nathan smiled politely. Not yet. Rebecca hesitated. You have never delayed a decision like this before. Nathan looked once again at Emily's drawing resting beside the silver photograph of Grace. Perhaps I have been making the wrong decisions too quickly. That evening, true to his promise, Nathan arrived outside Maple Grove Elementary before dismissal. Emily climbed into the vehicle carrying a small paper certificate she had received for helping a classmate during reading hour. Daddy, she said happily, my teacher said being kind is more important than being the smartest person in the room. Nathan laughed softly as they drove beneath rows of golden maple trees glowing in the setting sun. Your teacher sounds like a very wise woman. Emily smiled proudly before looking out the window. Mommy used to say almost the same thing. Nathan's hands tightened almost imperceptibly around the steering wheel. The peaceful silence inside the vehicle felt heavier than usual. For the first time, he quietly wondered whether success had slowly become louder than the promise he had made to the woman who trusted him with their daughter's heart. That evening the Carter home felt quieter than usual. A gentle rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while warm light from a single hanging lamp spread across the wooden dining table where Emily carefully colored pictures for school. The comforting smell of tomato soup and fresh bread filled the room, yet Nathan barely noticed either. His thoughts remained trapped inside the conference room he had left hours earlier. Every promise of greater success had somehow sounded emptier than the simple question his daughter asked every afternoon. Will you pick me up today? After dinner, Emily gathered the dishes before Nathan could stop her. "Mommy always said families work together," she said with a cheerful smile. Nathan thanked her and began washing the plates while Emily dried them one by one, humming the same melody Grace used to sing throughout the house. The familiar tune lingered in the quiet kitchen like a gentle memory that refused to disappear. Later that evening they settled together on the living room sofa beneath a soft knitted blanket. Emily rested comfortably against her father's shoulder while he read another chapter from her favorite adventure book, giving every character a different voice exactly as he always had. She laughed at the funny parts, corrected him whenever he intentionally exaggerated a sentence, and smiled with complete contentment. Those ordinary moments never lasted very long, but Nathan had begun realizing they were quietly becoming the most valuable part of every day. After Emily finally drifted to sleep, Nathan carried her upstairs, tucked the blanket gently beneath her shoulders, and kissed her forehead before quietly closing the bedroom door. Moonlight filtered through white curtains, illuminating shelves filled with storybooks, stuffed animals, family photographs, and the small wooden memory box where Emily kept every handwritten breakfast note he had ever given her. Nathan stood there for several moments before walking downstairs toward his study. The room smelled faintly of leather, cedar, and old books. Awards filled one wall. Business magazines praising his achievements filled another. Yet the object that immediately drew his attention was neither a trophy nor a framed newspaper cover. It was Grace's photograph resting beside the desk lamp. She smiled exactly as she always had, peaceful and reassuring, holding a much younger Emily beneath brilliant autumn leaves. Nathan gently picked up the silver frame and closed his eyes. During the final weeks before Grace passed away, she had held his hand with surprising strength and whispered words he had carried in his heart every single day since. "Promise me something," she had said softly. "If life ever asks you to choose between building a bigger company and raising our little girl, choose her without feeling guilty. Companies can always find another leader. Emily will never find another father." Nathan had promised immediately, believing the choice would never become difficult. Years later he finally understood how wrong he had been. He slowly returned the photograph to the desk before opening his laptop. Hundreds of unread messages waited for his attention. Travel itineraries. Investment proposals. International contracts. Without opening any of them, he created a new blank document. His fingers rested above the keyboard for almost a full minute before the first words finally appeared. "To the members of the board of directors." He paused, looked once more toward Grace's photograph, then continued typing. Every sentence came slowly, carrying more emotion than any speech he had ever delivered. He thanked every employee who had believed in his vision. He expressed confidence in the future of the company. Finally, he wrote the words he never imagined placing on paper. "Effective immediately, I am submitting my resignation as Chief Executive Officer." Nathan quietly printed the letter and signed his name with steady hands. As he slipped the folded pages into a plain white envelope, he failed to notice a small figure standing silently in the hallway. Emily had awakened for a drink of water and accidentally seen her father sealing the envelope. She could not read every word from that distance, but she recognized enough to understand one simple truth. Her father was preparing to leave something that mattered deeply to him, and for the first time since losing her mother, she saw sadness in his eyes that no bedtime story could hide. The morning of the annual shareholders' meeting arrived wrapped in cool autumn air and brilliant sunlight that reflected from the glass towers of downtown Manhattan. Nathan woke before dawn as he always did. The house remained perfectly quiet except for the gentle sound of coffee brewing in the kitchen and the soft ticking of the old clock hanging above the fireplace. He prepared breakfast with careful hands, arranging star-shaped pancakes beside fresh strawberries and a glass of orange juice. Before placing the plate on the table, he wrote one more note in neat handwriting and tucked it beneath the fork. It read, "Never forget that being kind is your greatest strength. Love, Dad." A few minutes later, Emily hurried downstairs carrying the small wooden memory box she rarely let out of her room. Nathan noticed it immediately but simply smiled. "Taking your treasure box on an adventure today?" he asked warmly. Emily nodded. "Some treasures belong close to your heart." Nathan laughed softly without realizing how true her words would become before the day ended. As they ate breakfast together, neither of them spoke very much. The peaceful silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floor while colorful maple leaves drifted gently outside. After breakfast, Nathan drove Emily towards school, but instead of stopping at the familiar entrance, he continued down the road. Emily looked at him with curious eyes. "Are we going somewhere else first?" Nathan smiled gently. "I thought today you might like to see where your daddy works before school." Her face immediately brightened with excitement. "Really?" "Really." They reached Carter Global Holdings shortly before the meeting began. Employees greeted Nathan with genuine respect, and many smiled warmly at Emily as she walked beside her father holding the little wooden box with both hands. Nathan introduced her to receptionists, security officers, maintenance staff, and assistants, thanking each person by name. Emily quietly noticed something unusual. Her father spoke to every employee exactly the same way, whether they managed million-dollar accounts or polished the marble floors. Kindness, she realized, never depended on someone's job title. Rebecca Collins met them in the executive lobby carrying Nathan's schedule for the day. Although she smiled at Emily, Nathan immediately recognized the concern hidden behind her calm expression. "Everything is ready," she said quietly. Nathan nodded once. "Thank you." Rebecca hesitated before asking, "Are you absolutely certain?" Nathan looked toward the leather briefcase resting beside him where the sealed resignation letter waited inside. "Yes." She lowered her eyes briefly before answering with quiet respect. "Then whatever happens today, it has been an honor." A few minutes later the auditorium doors opened. Hundreds of guests slowly filled the elegant room beneath sparkling crystal chandeliers. Reporters prepared cameras. Investors exchanged predictions about another record-breaking announcement. Board members reviewed polished presentation folders. Every conversation carried the same expectation. No one imagined the meeting would become one of the most unforgettable moments in the company's history. Nathan knelt beside Emily before walking toward the stage. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "you can stay here with Miss Rebecca. The meeting may be a little long." Emily nodded politely, but before Nathan stood, she quietly reached inside the wooden box and touched something hidden beneath its lid. He noticed the movement but assumed she had simply brought one of her treasured breakfast notes for comfort. Smiling warmly, he kissed her forehead. "I will see you as soon as I finish." Emily looked into her father's eyes for several silent seconds before whispering, "I love you, Daddy." Nathan answered without hesitation. "I love you more than every building in this city." As he turned and walked toward the brightly lit stage, carrying the leather briefcase that held his resignation letter, Emily gently opened the wooden box just enough to look at the carefully folded envelope resting inside. Written across the front in graceful handwriting were 4 simple words she had read many times before. For Nathan and Emily. The chairman welcomed the audience with confident enthusiasm, speaking proudly about another remarkable year of growth, innovation, and opportunity. Giant screens displayed soaring financial numbers while polite applause echoed through the elegant auditorium. Every presentation reinforced the same message. Carter Global Holdings had never been stronger. Nathan stood quietly near the side of the stage waiting for his turn, his leather briefcase resting beside the podium. He listened respectfully, but his attention wandered toward the back of the room where Emily sat beside Rebecca Collins. The little girl held the wooden box across her lap with both hands, her expression calm, almost thoughtful. She smiled when she noticed her father looking at her. Nathan answered with the gentle smile that had comforted her since she was old enough to understand what home meant. Finally, the chairman stepped away from the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced proudly, it is my honor to introduce the man whose vision transformed this company into a global example of integrity and excellence. Please welcome our founder and Chief Executive Officer, Nathan Carter. The audience immediately rose to its feet. Applause rolled across the room like distant thunder. Investors clapped enthusiastically. Employees smiled with genuine admiration. Reporters lifted cameras to capture another historic speech. Nathan walked slowly toward the podium, thanking everyone with a humble nod before placing his briefcase on the polished wooden surface. He removed a single white envelope and rested it beside the microphone. The applause gradually faded until complete silence settled over the auditorium. Warm afternoon sunlight streamed through the towering glass walls, reflecting softly across polished marble floors and crystal water glasses. Nathan looked across the familiar faces before speaking. For more than 20 years, this company has been my privilege, my responsibility, and one of the greatest blessings of my life, he began calmly. Together we created opportunities for thousands of families. Together we proved that integrity belongs in business. Together we built something far greater than profits. Gentle smiles appeared throughout the audience. Many expected another inspiring announcement about the future. Nathan paused briefly before continuing. But every meaningful journey eventually asks an important question. He unfolded the letter with steady hands. What matters most when success finally gives you everything you once believed you wanted? Curious expressions replaced confident smiles. Nathan quietly read the final paragraphs of the letter he had written during the lonely hours of the previous night. After careful reflection, I have decided to step away from my position as Chief Executive Officer. This decision was not made because I have lost faith in this company. It was made because I refuse to lose something even more precious than success. Soft whispers immediately spread across the auditorium. Several board members exchanged stunned glances. A financial reporter slowly lowered his notebook, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. One investor leaned forward in disbelief. The chairman instinctively rose from his chair, but Nathan gently raised one hand, asking for a few more moments. Businesses recover, Nathan continued quietly. Markets recover. Even fortunes recover. Childhood does not. Every bedtime story missed. Every school performance postponed. Every ordinary afternoon that quietly disappears can never be earned back. The room became perfectly still. Nathan looked once more toward Emily. My daughter deserves more than a father who appears between meetings. She deserves a father who is fully present while she is still young enough to reach for my hand. He carefully folded the letter, placed it on the podium, and stepped back from the microphone. The chairman started walking toward him, prepared to speak, but before a single word could be exchanged, the unmistakable sound of a small wooden chair sliding gently across the polished floor echoed through the silent auditorium. Every head turned toward the back of the room. Emily slowly stood, holding the wooden box tightly against her heart. Rebecca reached toward her with quiet concern. But Emily smiled reassuringly before taking her first careful step into the center aisle. The little girl looked directly at her father with gentle courage shining in her blue eyes. Her voice was soft, innocent, and completely fearless as it carried across the silent hall. Daddy, she said, please wait just a little longer. They still need to hear what Mommy wanted all of us to remember. No one in the auditorium moved. The silence became so complete that even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed unusually loud. Hundreds of successful men and women who spent their lives negotiating impossible deals suddenly found themselves watching an 8-year-old girl walk alone toward the stage. Emily carried the small wooden box carefully against her heart with both hands, taking slow, steady steps as warm afternoon sunlight stretched across the polished marble floor beneath her feet. Nathan remained standing beside the podium, unable to look away from his daughter. His calm expression softened into quiet concern, yet he recognized the same gentle determination in her eyes that Grace had carried whenever love mattered more than fear. Emily reached the front of the stage and looked up at her father. Daddy, she whispered softly, may I borrow the microphone for just a minute? Nathan hesitated only briefly before lowering the microphone to her height. He knelt beside her and smiled with quiet encouragement. Of course, sweetheart. Emily placed the wooden box on the podium and carefully lifted its polished lid. Inside rested a single cream-colored envelope tied with a pale blue ribbon that had faded with time. She untied the ribbon with patient hands before looking toward the audience. My mommy wrote this before she went to heaven, she said honestly. She told Daddy to keep it until the day he needed help remembering something important. Daddy forgot he still needed it, so I brought it today. A gentle ripple of emotion passed through the audience. Nathan quietly closed his eyes for a brief moment. He had completely forgotten the second letter Grace had written during those difficult final weeks, the one she had asked him to save for a future he never imagined would arrive. Emily unfolded the letter with extraordinary care. The paper showed tiny creases from years of being safely protected inside the wooden box, but Grace's graceful handwriting remained perfectly clear. Emily began reading slowly, making sure every word could be understood. My dearest Nathan, if these words ever reach your heart again, then life has probably become louder than our home. I know the kind of man you are. You will work harder than anyone. You will carry responsibilities nobody else can see. You will believe that protecting your family means giving them everything money can provide. But please remember something even more important. Our little girl will never measure your love by the size of your office. She will measure it by whether you are sitting beside her when she needs someone to listen. She will never remember another business award. She will remember another bedtime story. She will never count the companies you built. She will count the evenings you came home. Emily paused briefly as emotion caught in her small voice, then continued reading. If one day you believe walking away from success is the only way to keep your promise to Emily, do not feel ashamed. But if the people beside you truly understand the values you spent your life teaching them, they will not ask you to choose between leadership and fatherhood. They will help you protect both. And if you ever forget this truth, I hope our daughter is brave enough to remind you. Emily slowly lowered the letter. Tears rested quietly in Nathan's eyes, but he never looked away from his daughter. The auditorium remained absolutely silent. Reporters had stopped writing. Cameras hung forgotten at their sides. Several executives quietly removed their glasses. One elderly shareholder bowed his head, gently wiping away tears he never expected to shed during a business meeting. Emily carefully folded the letter before looking toward the audience with innocent sincerity. My daddy always keeps his promises, she said softly. He promised Mommy he would take care of me. I do not want him to stop helping people at work. I just do not want him to forget that I still need my daddy. 2. Her simple words drifted gently through the silent room, touching every heart more deeply than the longest speech ever could. For several long moments, no one spoke. The silence inside the auditorium no longer belonged to surprise. It belonged to reflection. Warm afternoon light continued spilling through the towering glass walls, bathing the polished wooden podium in a gentle golden glow while Emily carefully placed her mother's letter back inside the wooden box with quiet respect. Nathan remained beside her, unable to find words powerful enough to answer what his daughter had just given everyone in the room. The chairman slowly rose from his chair. The confidence that had filled his voice earlier that afternoon had disappeared, replaced by genuine humility. He walked toward the stage without rushing, stopping only a few feet from Nathan before looking down briefly at the folded resignation letter resting beside the microphone. Nathan, he said softly, I have chaired hundreds of meetings during my career. I have listened to thousands of presentations. I have studied every financial report imaginable. Yet today an 8-year-old girl has taught me more about leadership than every conference I have ever attended. The audience remained perfectly still. One by one, members of the board quietly stood from their seats. Rebecca Collins gently wiped a tear from her cheek while smiling proudly toward Emily. An elderly investor slowly removed his glasses and spoke with a trembling voice. My grandson invited me to his baseball games every Saturday for nearly 3 years. I always promised I would come after the next important meeting. Listening to this little girl, I suddenly realized I cannot remember those meetings anymore. But I remember every invitation I declined. He lowered his head with quiet regret. That is a debt no amount of money can repay. Another director rose beside him. We have spent years discussing productivity, efficiency, and performance. Somewhere along the way we quietly accepted the dangerous idea that family always comes after success. Perhaps the problem was never our business strategy. Perhaps it was the culture we rewarded. Gentle agreement spread throughout the auditorium. The chairman looked toward every member of the board before speaking again. Nathan, you offered your resignation because you believed leaving was the only honorable way to keep your promise to your daughter. He paused briefly before continuing. I believe we failed you long before today because we allowed you to think that was your only choice. Nathan listened quietly, saying nothing. The chairman reached toward the resignation letter but did not pick it up. On behalf of the board, I cannot accept this resignation. A soft murmur moved across the audience. Before anyone could respond, he continued. Not because this company cannot survive without you. You have built an extraordinary leadership team. We will survive. We refuse your resignation because no father should ever believe he must abandon his calling in order to honor his family. Several executives immediately nodded. One smiled with visible relief. Another quietly applauded before the entire auditorium gradually joined together, not with loud celebration, but with sincere appreciation. The chairman turned toward the audience once more. Effective today, we begin restructuring executive leadership so responsibility is shared rather than carried by one person alone. International travel will rotate among senior executives. Flexible family commitments will become part of our leadership policy, not an exception requiring apology. We built a company that improves lives. It is time we begin with our own people. The applause grew warmer. Nathan looked down at Emily, who gently slipped her small hand into his. Daddy, she whispered, does this mean you can still come home for dinner? Nathan smiled through grateful eyes and knelt beside her once again. Yes, sweetheart, he answered quietly. Dinner, bedtime stories, school concerts, and every ordinary afternoon I can possibly keep. Emily wrapped her arms around him without another word. Around them, successful men and women who had spent years measuring achievement through numbers quietly witnessed a different kind of victory. It was not the triumph of profit over competition. It was the quiet redemption of a company finally remembering that its greatest strength had never been found inside quarterly reports. It had always been found inside the hearts of the people who walked through its doors every morning and returned home to the families waiting for them each night. 1 year later, the pace of life inside the Carter household had changed in quiet, beautiful ways that no financial report could ever measure. Morning sunlight still slipped gently through the kitchen windows, warming the wooden table where Nathan carefully arranged star-shaped pancakes beside fresh strawberries and glasses of orange juice. The comforting aroma of fresh coffee filled the house while Emily happily packed another handwritten breakfast note into her treasured wooden memory box. She had never stopped collecting them. Each tiny message reminded her that love was often spoken in ordinary moments rather than extraordinary speeches. Nathan still led Carter Global Holdings, but he no longer carried every responsibility alone. The leadership team worked together with trust instead of exhaustion, and the company continued growing stronger than anyone had predicted. Business magazines praised the new executive model. Universities invited board members to explain how shared leadership had increased both innovation and employee well-being. Other companies quietly adopted similar policies after realizing that healthy families often built healthier organizations. Nathan appreciated the recognition, but he rarely spoke about business when he returned home each evening. He preferred hearing about spelling tests, art projects, playground adventures, and the latest chapter of whatever story Emily happened to be reading. Those conversations became the true highlight of every day. On a bright October afternoon, golden maple leaves floated gently across the sidewalk outside Maple Grove Elementary School. Nathan arrived 15 minutes before the final bell, leaning casually against his familiar sport utility vehicle with a warm smile already waiting on his face. The moment the school doors opened, children poured outside laughing beneath the crisp autumn sky. Emily spotted her father immediately and ran toward him carrying a science project carefully balanced in both hands. Nathan applauded dramatically as though she had just won the greatest award in the world. Emily laughed, placed the project safely inside the vehicle, and slipped her hand into his as naturally as breathing. Together they walked toward the nearby community garden instead of driving straight home. Flowers bloomed beneath the gentle afternoon sun while butterflies drifted quietly through the colorful rows. At the center of the garden stood a simple white bench dedicated to Grace. Nathan and Emily often visited before heading home. Emily carefully placed a small bouquet of wildflowers beside the bench before sitting quietly. "I think Mommy would like it here," she whispered. Nathan looked across the peaceful garden where children played nearby and families enjoyed the beautiful afternoon together. "She would," he answered softly. "She always believed the most beautiful things grow where kindness is planted." Emily smiled thoughtfully before opening the wooden memory box one more time. Inside rested every breakfast note her father had ever written, along with Grace's letter, still protected by the faded blue ribbon. She gently touched the envelope before closing the lid again. "Daddy," she asked quietly, "do you think Mommy knows you kept your promise?" Nathan looked toward the clear blue sky before answering with complete honesty. "I hope she does." Emily squeezed his hand with gentle confidence. "I think she always knew you would." They sat together without speaking for several peaceful minutes, listening to birds singing softly among the trees while cool autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves across the garden. There were no cameras. No reporters. No shareholders. No applause. Only a father and his daughter sharing the ordinary afternoon they had once feared would disappear forever. As the golden sunlight slowly settled across the quiet path leading home, Nathan realized that the greatest legacy of his life would never be written inside annual reports or engraved upon awards displayed in polished offices. His true legacy walked beside him wearing white sneakers, carrying a small wooden memory box filled with love, and still reaching for his hand before crossing the street. Sometimes the richest man in the world is simply the father who comes home in time to hear one more story before bedtime, and sometimes the quiet promises we keep become the greatest success we ever achieve.